This videotape was edited from a 4-day advanced submodalities training in Boulder, Colorado, late September of 1987. All the participants in this training have completed an NLP practitioner training as well as a 12-day advanced submodalities training. Richard presupposes this background as he goes on to present new material he's developed recently. Since Richard always demonstrates what he's teaching while he's teaching it, as well as incorporates other NLP methods, the videotape offers information at many levels simultaneously. Those without extensive NLP training can enjoy learning the particular method being taught, while someone with more complete background can learn at multiple and deeper levels, particularly with repeated viewing.
Mood generators are kind of interesting in the sense that one of the things is that there's kind of a quirky little thing inside of submodalities that as you go through the course of a day or an hour or stuff, sometimes there are times where you have, but you just can't help, where you have like a good day. Even if things go wrong, it doesn't bother you. You know, it's just there are up days and there are down days. Now, I sort of tripped across this when I was doing a seminar in Vancouver a long time ago. And we had first started working with submodalities, and there was a lady there, and she was about 70 years old. She had blue hair, diamond rings everywhere, lots of jewelries. And I asked her where she got all that jewelry, and she went, "My husband's. I outlived them all." She'd outlived 7 of them. Not a bad deal. Yeah. And she was getting married again. She told me she was getting married again in 6 weeks. Now, the thing is this lady up in Vancouver had one of the most unusual ones. This is not going to be something that you'll find to be common, but it's to give you an idea. That the thing is she told me that some days that she just, you know, was down in the dumps. She felt blue. It was, you know, it's awful. And then some days, all day, she felt wonderful. And that she'd gone to therapy, she'd done everything, and that no one could really find out why sometimes she just was down. So I asked her to go and think of one of the down days, think of one of the up days. I said, now, you should compare the memories. I said, you know, is there any difference in the location of the images? She went, no, they're both panoramic. And I kept going through everything. And I couldn't find any difference. And because nothing. No difference in the sound, no difference in anything. She'd always go, well, I feel different when I look at them. And I'd go, yeah, but that's what we're trying to change. And finally, I went and I got to tint. And tint is where, when you have images, very often, have you ever turned the tint knob on a television? So, you know, a lot of color TVs have too much red in them all the time. You know, and if they have too much red, then the people's faces are green and stuff. You know, especially if you stay in hotels, there's the little NARF or whatever it is that beats up the pizza on the commercial. I think it also does the televisions in hotel rooms. Because no matter what you do, you cannot adjust the color right. People are always green or red, one or the other. You know, it's like you get all kinds of things, like their dresses are always odd colors and things. You watch Dynasty and you look at it and you go, eee, they have terrible taste in clothing. Now, what she did is she put a blue tint over the whole picture. And she felt down. And, you know, if you stop and think about the era she grew up in, they used to have an idiom that was, I feel in the pink, right? And an idiom about having the blues. And the thing is that it wasn't so much that it was a representation of what did happen. What would happen is that when she would think about the day, see, because there was one of the things that gave it away is that she noticed that she always felt blue on Monday. And there was a thing called Blue Mondays. And by coloring a representation that way, it colored the whole day. See, when she woke up, if she thought about things and there was blue, it's like and the thing is, it's like she was sitting in the seminar, after you find this out, you always go to yourself, God, I should have known. She's all dressed in pink. She has a pink purse, pink everything. I mean, she had pink everything, right? Now, the thing is that I asked her afterwards, I said, what other color clothes do you wear? And she said, well, I always like to wear pink. She said, but I have blue clothes, too. And the thing is if you opened her closet, it was probably segregated. She put on the clothes, and that was it for the whole day. Now, one of the things that you're going to find is if you stop and you find for yourself moods, Now, moods are different than just responses. A lot of times when people do submodalities, they do responses. The thing about a mood has more to do with something where a whole bunch of stuff can run through it. And what you really need to do now is to take the elements that you have about time, because what we're going to do is slam through some memories. The way you do elicitation on this is you have somebody pick a day that was just really an up day, man, the kind of day they want to have more of. Now, there's two critical elements in this. One is going to have to do with submodalities, because what you want to do is to go through the day and sample different things during the day, different time, place, coordinates. And what you're going to look for is you want to look for the similarity between them. In other words, when we did elicitation yesterday, rather than doing the compare and contrast routine, where you compare one set of submodalities with another, what we did is we looked for a whole bunch of similarities. Remember? Okay, this is the same kind of program. See, when you're trying to elicit things about submodalities that run over time, one of the ways you do elicitation is instead of looking for just the differences, you're looking for just the similarities. Now, the thing is also, this is just like the other one, will be helpful to you if you start on the opposite end of your list, because these are going to be really different control mechanisms. Things like when you talk about beliefs, size and shape and distance are powerful analog things. When you start dealing with moods, they're a little more amorphous in the sense that you'll find things like tint, whether it's three-dimensional, because if they have flat images, it'll be a dull day, but when they have three-dimensional images, sometimes it just has to do with sparkle on the pictures. I've had several people where it's like the objects. You know, when you look at Formica top, right? How it's different. It doesn't have that flat surface like wood, or when you first shine a table up, that when they look in their images, the focus changes to such a degree that everything shines. Now, that means you're going to have to, just rather than sort of running through that list the way you would normally, you're going to have to slow down and really go through and have people think of 5 different times. But and what you do is you have them run. Look at one, run a little segment of it. First have them run through the day. And take the time, crank up the speed, and run through the whole day, right, that they say was a good day. Because that's what we're interested in here. Have them pick what's a really up day for them. Now, the other piece you're going to have to do is when you go through the segments, I want you to go in and do samplings of the auditory. And I even want you to write them down. Because one of the things I found out is there's a real difference in mood between the kinds of pieces of language you find in terms of referential index. That's the difference between whether... See, it's one thing... I worked with a guy who is from India. He now lives in New York and is a psychiatrist. And he went to a workshop I did in San Francisco. And we were yucking it up and having a good time and stuff. And about the second day into the workshop, this guy came up to me about noon and he went, "Dr. Bandler," he said, "I have a very serious problem." And I mean, I figure by the day and a half into it, when you start coming up and asking me about serious shit, number one, you do have a serious problem. And he said, so I looked at him and I said, "Well, I bet I know what it is." Now, knowing what I know about India is, I said, "Let me guess." I said, "The way you're monitoring things, you're not having much fun." And that was kind of obvious. And he went, "Yes, this is the problem. When I am with other people, I am always comparing to find out who is one up and who is one down. I am constantly judging them." Now, being from India, there's a certain part of that that makes sense. Also, having studied with the boys at MRI, there's another part of that makes sense. But the thing is that I told him, I said, "You know, that sounds like a lot of fucking work to me. In the course of a conversation, to figure out whether you are one up or one down at all moments in time is just a lot of fucking work. That's all there is to it." I mean, you know, it's like trying to figure out whether you have high or low self-esteem. This is like a full-time job, right? They don't even pay you for that crap, you know. Do I feel good about myself or do I feel bad? Am I up? Am I down? Now, what I said to him is that I said, "How do you know when you're doing this?" And the thing is that he used auditory internal, and the thing is that there's so much self-referential stuff. This is where you get most of the stuff that has to do with people being assholes. They're asking, you know, am I getting what I want? Constantly. Me, 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 me. And the thing is it's not so much that people shouldn't go after things when they want them, but the thing is in order for them to really make decisions about what they want, they have to have some basis on how to get around being what I refer to as a dickhead. That's somebody that if they don't get their way is going to make other people feel bad. And if you ask the question, you know, am I getting what I want? Am I having fun? Then you're talking about doing it at others' expense. And it's always going to boomerang on you because you're always going to step on the wrong toe. Now, the thing is that what I want you to do is, as well as go through and sample and find this piece of the submodalities that's similar, I also want you to sample the referential index. Because when people are asking, are we having fun yet, right, with a presupposition, or am I having fun yet, or how are we going to have fun, where there's presuppositions, if you listen to the statements where people are being self-referential, you know, and even when they use we, it's still a referential question. It's the part where people ask questions, because when people say, I'm in a good mood or a bad mood, in order for them to know it, they have to think about it at some point during the day. If you go, you know, I'm feeling down, and then they go, what's wrong? Of course, what's wrong presupposes something is. So when you find those kinds of comments, the internal dialogue, you want to find out where the internal dialogue is coming from. That is, what direction internally. You know, it's usually them sneaky voices behind them that's going. Just go, why are you feeling bad? Oh, I am feeling bad, now that you mention it. What's wrong? Something must be wrong. All of that stuff, that self-hypnosis stuff from the wired and tape loops. So you want to look for the loops that ask questions, especially to find out if they have presuppositions. Because the two things that we're going to do is see, now once you have the information, the question is, what do you do with it? Well, you go back to the last time we were here, and you ask your partner, or if you have to real quick elicit it, find out what their post-hypnotic suggestion strategy is. Then give them a post-hypnotic suggestion to use the strategy which works. That if they begin to feel in a bad mood, that suddenly these submodalities will switch, and they'll get themselves out of it. Now, when I worked with Andy the other day, the schizophrenic I was talking about, I used a technique that's very simple chaining, which is to literally keep running through bad mood, question, out of it. And part of what I was doing was utilizing the thing about how you change moods. Now, if you get in a bad mood and you ask questions that make you in a worse mood, it's a never-ending cycle down. So what you want to do with the post-hypnotic suggestion strategy is to build a cycle that gets people out of a bad mood. It's not that they stay happy all the time. You know, that'd get boring anyway. But that if they really start to get where they want to change their mood, that the auditory kicks in, which presupposes that they'll switch to the submodality of a good mood. So now, first go through and have them think of good days. And when you look at it, make sure it looks like a good day. Now, there's another piece to this that I want you to notice about it, which is that typically moods will be whole body sensations as opposed to part body sensations. And the thing is that they also have a tendency to be surface skin level responses. That, you know, a good day, they'll just kind of have a feeling all over them that they're in a good mood. So when they get to that feeling, like when you get them into the state, anchor it, right? Whatever it is, trigger the anchor off itself, and then when you run through the submodalities, try cranking different things up and down to find out which things amplify it, or if you could turn one up or down, which ones cut it off and which ones cut it on. For example, with the lady with tent, right, the minute you started to turn the blue down, she would really respond with where the feeling of the mood was. As opposed to, like, when you turn the brightness up on a picture, a feeling will get stronger. But typically a part body feeling, not a whole body sensation. So pay attention to that whole body sensation and let it be the guide to help you to find the most precise submodality that you can. Very often this is controlled by one or two elements, because even when they were believing something during the day where they had, you know, pictures of places and all that kind of stuff, sometimes you can have, and this is another way of getting at it too. If you have any trouble, have them pick something that they believe when they're having a good day and a bad day, both. And then have them think of the bad day and the belief, and have them think of a good day and a belief, and then notice what the difference between those two is. Because the belief will remain constant. You know, that there are things they believe when they're in a bad mood and in a good mood. But yet the mood itself will prevail. And pay attention to those presuppositions in this, because you'll really be surprised how much this is auditory programming. Because in order to maintain a mood, you have to remind yourself. Otherwise, you would forget and go into another one. So it takes a good auditory tape loop to do that. You know, things just aren't working out. Things are not just working out. You can always change them to things aren't working out yet. This hour, this minute. So, take about 15 minutes apiece, and then let's get back together and examine what you have, okay? How many of you found that the location of auditory made a huge difference? All the people in one group. Both of you did. That
the speed of the auditory.
Speed of auditory, too. Speed of auditory. Volume, we had one that had to do just with volume. If the auditory was there, or if you turn the auditory off, then they got general sense of well-being, turned it on, and they should read Carlos Castaneda's book. Right? They can learn to get rid of your auditory internal totally. Either that or turn it into a Led Zeppelin tune or something. It's always one of the things for people that, I have all these people, they go, I can't stop my internal auditory. And I go, well, don't stop it, just turn the volume down till you can't hear it. And they go, I can't turn the volume down. I go, then drown it out with music. There are so many people that don't hear music in their head. That's why they sell so many stereos, I guess. One guy, you know, every time they did elicitation, there was no auditory internal stuff. And you could tell, because there wasn't much auditory external stuff either. That when, you know, it came down to like listening, doing the meta model things, it's like one thing to get the wrong meta model challenge. It's another to not notice the guy made a statement. The guy would look down at his piece of paper if the person said anything. He'd look up and he'd go, the person go, well, you know, I made it. And he'd go, oh, say it again. And he'd look down at his paper and he'd miss it again. And I began to wonder, I asked the guy, I said, have you had your ears tested? And the guy looked at me. Of course he said, what? You know. I said, have you had your ears tested? Can you hear? And he goes, oh, yeah. He said, you know, they made me do that 3 or 4 times where I work. I thought, makes sense to me. So what other kinds of things did you find? What's the difference between a general sense of well-being and a general sense of yuck?
Panoramic.
So a lot of you found panoramic stuff had to do with it. That when it was smaller, this is just a guess, when it was smaller, right, and more focused, you could feel shittier.
Right.
Yeah. You know, that's when you focus in on crap. That's like, you know, if you have to focus in on something you can't get done, right, that's always a good way to feel like shit, you know. Yeah, a lot of people it has to do with three-dimensional. How many of you have ever tried taking, you all make three-dimensional pictures? Make a real vivid three-dimensional picture. Okay. Now, do you know the difference between a three-dimensional picture and a hologram? See, you know what? How you can make something, see a three-dimensional picture, and then you can look out a window and see something, right? Okay, three-dimensional picture is three-dimensional. Holographic is just like you're looking through a window, and it's just real. And you can even, like, if you move, it can stay the same, but you can take it and rotate it and see what's on the back side. It's not just three-dimensional from one point of view, it's three-dimensional from all points of view. Which makes it interesting, because if you make an internal representation, right, and then you turn it into to being holographic, and then float up, and in it, you can enter some very bizarre realities that way. It's a good formula to entertain yourself late at night. They think their in-house movies are good. They ought to see mine. They get wild. What other things did you find? Did anybody know? Yeah.
Change of word from why does it have to be this way to how does it have to be this way.
Yeah.
She then goes to it's my choice, and then she got angry, so at least we're on the move.
Yeah. A little anger is always a good way to motivate yourself. A lot of times you'll find that the why questions are how people drive themselves into the shitter all the time. That, you know, there's also there's one of the ones is when you find people that are nervous all the time. They have voices that ask them questions they can't answer. What's that person thinking? You know, what is it you're not thinking about right now? What are you not noticing? negative questions are one of the ways when you have people with a lot of anxiety, they have these internal dialogues that, one or two of them that are asking them all these questions. And rapid fire, if you go in and ask rapid fire questions like, what are you not thinking about? What are you not noticing? What's that person? Is there anything you're not worrying about that you should be? You start stacking that shit on top of each other, man, and you're on your way to a full tilt migraine headache. That's what you can tell these Excedrin people know that. They have commercials that are like this. You ever notice these headache commercials try to give you a headache? They used to have one with an anvil and a thing that go. Sometimes you wake up and your veins feel like this. And go. And if it keeps feeling like that, then you'll need one of these. Oh, yeah, give me one of those. What do you mean I have to go to the store? I have a headache now. I can't wait to go to the store. The one I like is the Sominex commercials. The ones they try to put you to sleep with the commercial. Take Sominex tonight and sleep, sleep, sleep. They should have had Milton do one of those. I could have just seen Milton come on. Purple pajamas, rocking back and forth the way he used to go. Now, sometimes you have trouble sleeping, and when you need to go to sleep fast, you take Sominex. Good night. Anyway, let's break for lunch now.
Would you mind waking me up first?
Oh, that's Vibrin. Revive with Vibrin! They always try yelling at you. They just do this. They have two truck drivers like this. And the one goes, hey, wake up! Huh, what? He goes, you can't fall asleep? Why? The guy with the wheels driving, why can't he fall asleep? That's what I want to know. I always wanted to know that. You're supposed to sleep when the other one drives. Let's go, keep me awake, man. I took all these Vibrin. I got nobody to talk to, man. I just got to have somebody to talk to after you take these Vibrin, man. You feel like talking to somebody. You got so much to say that's on your mind. Boy, you feel great, make you feel alert. But I don't want to look at the road. I want to look at you and talk to you so that I can scare the shit out of you. Because while I'm going like this, you're going to be going, that ought to wake you up, huh? Okay, I'll see you in an hour and a half. It's like, for some reason, I don't know what it is about psychiatric training, but Steve and I were talking about this the other day. It must have something to do with the fact that they're not used to using different tools for different things, that they're still looking for that one thing that does everything. That I found that when a psychiatrist has successful result with one person with reframing, they go reframing insane. Right? They really do. They go completely, and they go for things like meta-reframing. I'll get these manuscripts 3 or 4 times a year from some psychiatrist somewhere that has written a book about how to reframe everything all at once. I got one from a guy in New York called The Genesis Principle, in which you did these things where you converted all of your problems into X's and Y's and Z's, and then you went through and did this content reframe on your entire life. It's sort of a megalomaniac approach to the whole thing. But the thing is that when you take a technique like reframing and attempt to apply it to something, see, the thing about guilt is a very unusual response, in the sense that it always strikes me that when people discover that they're doing something that's hurting somebody else, that they would feel relieved, because what would mean was that they would stop it. So when they have guilt they've been carrying around, the thing is I always immediately, my little hackles go up and I go, something's not right here. Because, it's kind of like you can almost predict they're going to be making the same mistake. So the first thing I try to sort out when people tell me that they're carrying around guilt about stuff is that there's an old thing from the Gestalt days. They used to say guilt is really buried resentment. But that just meant they could turn guilt into resentment. That was their way of chaining things. Now, I've discovered that the best way to get out of any single response you're stuck in is to chain people out of it. That when you attempt to swish somebody out of a single response, you build a one-step chain. But that very often, the kind of thing that really gets people to kick loose out of it is if you can find, see when you have somebody who's stuck hesitating, right? I mean, they hesitate about everything. That one of the things is that if you try to get them to jump straight to go for it, it's too big a jump. Now, guilt is even more true than that. It's more like that. Except there's a funny thing in that the thing about guilt is that there's so many aspects of behavior that are not implied. Guilt does not imply doing anything. It's one of the ultimate and stagnant responses. Say, I mean, even frustration implies more behavior. I mean, if you're totally frustrated, you're at least about to explode. But when you're guilty, it's a reflexive kind of thing where it doesn't imply something that would build up. It doesn't in any way imply motion. So one of the things that I found is very, very useful is to understand, because guilt's really one of those ultimate normalizations. I mean, if you think about it, people will always come in and say, well, I have guilt. And I always go, give it to me. And they go, well, because they don't even say they feel guilt. I mean, typically we don't go, well, I feel guilty. And then you can, ask them questions like, well, where'd you fuck up? That's the new meta model. So where'd you screw up, asshole? And say, well, man, I'm always late, so I always feel guilty. But, it's again, the thing is like, this kind of came out of the flirting seminar, is that there were people that felt guilty about wanting to have fun and about wanting to flirt. They would even think about doing it, and they'd feel guilty about doing it even before they did it, which is weird if you think about it. As long as you're going to feel bad doing it in advance, they don't even do whatever it is. So what would happen is because there were all of these things that happened, and that's what's called in commands that were given to you by your parents. Like, especially a lot of women were told that they, actually it's actually men more than women that got stuff about feeling guilty about flirting. Especially the women's movement came by and knocked most of that out of most men. They tried to be authentic instead, and warm and genuine, and that really came down to being wussy. And the women that liberated them looked back and went, that's pathetic, Go, let's put it back the other way. I don't like this no more. But then we ended up with all these guys that were real sensitive, but at least we have someone to stay home and take care of things while we go out and have fun. It's a good job for them. I know lots of guys like that. They can stay home and do that, and I'll go out and fill in for them. Now, the thing is that when the people like that, when they consider doing something and they feel guilty, they don't feel like they deserve it. It's like because they're basically a bad person, and and they give you all of this rigmarole. The thing is that they feel the guilt before they even do the act. So a lot of times guilt is just a reflexive thing that boils down to a kinesthetic excuse. It's not a verbal excuse. You can get the verbal ones if you ask them. But in a way, it's almost a kinesthetic excuse for not having action, because you get a set of sensations. Now, the thing is that I've found, and as far as I'm concerned, no matter how advanced a workshop is, I find that most people are not really that skilled at building chains. The thing is that when you want to take a response like guilt, to me, the one thing I want to do is turn guilt into curiosity. Because the one thing is when you're really curious to the point where you're foaming at the mouth, right, you're going to find out something about whatever it is you're preventing yourself from doing. That, for me, one of the things is that I've found that there's one way of doing chaining, which is a little bit strange, and it takes a little bit longer. But if you do it a few times, one of the things is you find out you don't have to do it. You find out enough about the chain that you can install it better. And that's literally to take, if you take something like guilt, you take something like curiosity, all right? You think of those as like poles, right? Now, to me, what would be something that would lead to curiosity and could lead away from guilt? It doesn't have to be relevant in any way. Boredom. Boredom leads to curiosity?
Or frustration?
Well, yeah. See, we can stick in a few, but guilt is going to lead to boredom. It's a lot easier to get from guilt to boredom than it would be to get from guilt to curiosity. I agree with you. Okay, so let's say, so boredom is not one of my favorite responses, but people who are guilty deserve it. So let's stick it in there. What the hell? Now, if we start out with guilt. Okay, we put boredom. We have curiosity. Now, what's going to lead from boredom? We could put frustration and then curiosity. Okay, and maybe we could go guilt. And what would lead us a little bit better to boredom? Maybe we better go back and change this one a little bit. How about guilt leading to frustration? See, I mean, guilt does lead to frustration, right? Frustration can lead to impatience, and impatience can lead to curiosity. It's smoother. Okay, now, the thing is that even when you take something like that, if you literally go through and not in over great detail, this is where you want to really start using your eyes, because we want to do this quickly. The thing about installing chains is to be able to run the person through it quickly. So the thing is that what I want you to do is to write those 4 words down in front of you and think, what I'm going to do is install this chain. But I'm going to install a chain that almost of itself has a propulsion system behind it. So the thing is the way you have to think about it is, now you want to get the person into the state of guilt, whatever they have guilt about. Okay. Now you know you could anchor that and anchor the next one and anchor the next one and build a chain. But the thing is those chains don't always generalize well enough when you do them that way. They don't have what I refer to as the oomph that it takes to really do it. I mean, if you want to do something more powerful, it's a little more interesting to install your chain while you elicit submodalities. Say, because number one, they don't know how much you're doing. But it gives you an unprecedented opportunity to really build a very powerful system. Now, there are some rules about doing this, because I always tell people there's no difference between installation and elicitation. What I'd like to do is to give you an example of how that's the case. And it has to do primarily with this thing about sequence. Now, we'll start with guilt. Okay. Frustration. Impatience. Okay. And curiosity. Now, normally we could even stick another one in there that might make it smoother, but we'll keep it to 4 just for our purposes here. And if it doesn't work good enough for somebody, we'll go back and fix them later. Now, with each of these responses, there's a double step about how you elicit. The thing is you have to keep in mind that the first thing you want to do is to diminish the guilt. In other words, when you're eliciting the submodalities, always what you got to keep in mind is the first thing you want to do is get guilt and then diminish it. So your first step is first you got to have the response with whatever the first one is. So the first one is to get the response. And then the next thing you want to do is to diminish it as you increase the second response. So that as you oscillate back and forth between these, more than wanting to know what they are, you guys remember the stuff about amplifying states? About how you can turn a submodality and the state becomes more intense? Okay. Now, if when you're eliciting, instead of really looking for what it is, you're going through, have them take the guilt and then find a submodality that decreases it, have them switch to the other one and find a submodality that increases it, right? And then go over here and find one that diminishes this one more and one that increases this one even more. To the point where when you go back to this one, it automatically begins to fade. If you think of it as training, because what you're actually doing is training them to make a submodality shift in their mind, that when guilt is there, diminish it, right, and increase frustration. Now, as soon as you get it, then you, of course, go through and start doing the things. Since you already know what these are, you do is you literally go through and you have them make this one get smaller, right, and increase in patience. Now, you do this with a cover, okay, and of course this process is going to repeat all the way down until you end up continually increasing curiosity. Now, the advantage of it is that the person doesn't know that you're installing this. When you're asking about submodalities and you're sitting down, in essence, you're overtly eliciting submodalities, but you're covertly installing a chain. Now, the process of doing this allows you to really be able to build a chain. Because you know, like when you were doing the stuff where you did chains by sitting down with somebody and having to go through all the behavioral things to get the most intense response you could to anchor it? Well, this way, what you do is every time, instead of firing off an anchor that's strong, each time you go back to it, you can make it stronger But then instead of having to lift off the anchor and letting it fade, you can use things that diminish it and make the response go down quickly. Because when you know that, for example, size is a powerful phenomenon, or distance is a powerful analog phenomenon, you can begin to tell people, in essence, right now, so you say, okay, you're eliciting, and you go, okay, now you have your guilt, right? Okay, so you go over and get that. Now, what I want you to do is as you let that go into the distance, I want you to go over and now look at the second one and compare the difference. So as they go over in the distance, when they go, now bring this one up close, right, and look at it. So you literally can control the mechanisms by using distance, right? And what you're doing is you want to make it so that as soon as you put this one up, when they go back to this one, you can see and watch their eyes. Now, this is where the nonverbal signals for submodalities become valuable. And you remember when you do swish patterns, how people say things like, well, I can't get the picture up close now. You've heard that kind of stuff? In essence, this is what you were doing. Because the swish pattern comes out of, it is a formula for the way of chaining together groups of submodalities. Now, when you switch in your mind, because people are always, see, what happened is the swish pattern is the name of a single set of combinations. Now people start talking about a swish pattern, where there's 90 different ways to shift. And there are formulas that work and formulas that don't work. The question about how to know which ones to do when has to do with wanting to build chains. So you really, in your mind, the way you think about what you're doing is that you are always at one point trying to diminish one and increase another till you can go back to the first one and watch it go up to the other one till it's irresistible. And then you start diminishing the one you just increased, right, and decreasing that one and increasing another. So as you go through and do elicitation, first between guilt and frustration, then between frustration and impatience, actually what you're doing is chaining the responses together. So when you get to impatience and have it go to curiosity, right, then you can go back, once you've done that where curiosity increases, then you go back and you go think about the guilt. And you can literally watch them go and end up with the curiosity. And especially with people who do location, it's hysterical to watch them, because they'll do that. You go back to the guilt, and they'll go, yeah. And you go, have you got it? And they go, well, I can. You know, they kind of have trouble doing it. You go back and hold the guilt, and they go, well, it doesn't really want to stay there. And what you're after as a test for you is to make it so that it's difficult for them to hold the first one, because you've enticed them along. Now, see, as soon as you can take a static response like guilt and make it so that it has a propulsion system behind it, which is what chains are. Chains are the motor that make things run. It's when just the very strength of a response makes you want to have another one be strong, because you've done this over and over again with your brain. That's how the swish pattern works, and that's how you really build, because what the swish pattern is a device of installing chains. Now, if you build a little bit longer and more subtle changes, the artistry with which you can do these things becomes that much more elegant. So remember, just like what you're looking for is the elements, the nonverbal analog elements, distance, size, all of the things that can change gradually that have to do with increasing and diminishing a response. If it has to do with distance. So in essence, you almost go through it. But instead of doing it the way you would normally do it, where you turn it up and down, you only do it one way. You only do things for guilt initially, once you have it there, that diminish it. And you only do things for frustration to increase it. Right? And then once you've got it, then you only do things to diminish frustration and to increase impatience. And you keep oscillating back and forth, and that's what ties them together. So that once you get to curiosity, when you leave that one where you only do increase in curiosity, right, and then you just stop, then you go back to the guilt and let it go until the curiosity increases. As long as you leave it open-ended, then the curiosity becomes more and more and more and more unbearable until they have to know. And the nice thing about things that people are guilty about, you turn guilt into curiosity. Especially like when we do this kind of thing in the flirting seminar, when people are too guilty, it's also because they're so pompous and self-referential. It's part of the reason. See, one of the things that years ago that I did is I had somebody that came in and their problem was that they were a wallflower. And, and they said, well, I'm just, I go to these dances and I can't go and talk to anybody. And I turned around and I looked at him and I said, you inconsiderate asshole. And they went, what? And I said, you know how bad it feels to be a wallflower? And you could look at somebody else standing there and not go help them? You overly concerned with yourself, you pompous idiot. And they went, I never thought about it that way. Well, the thing about being so self-referential that they don't ever do anything like switch referential index. In essence, that's a big part of what this is. This builds inside of people a switch referential index change, where what they're doing is instead of the index always being themselves, curiosity has to do with other people. So it's always good to switch pronouns as you go through this. I even leave my sentences unfinished when I do it. I say, so you're really curious, and you can make the strength of that curiosity really more. You leave your eyebrows up and your voice tone up, so it's always a question. You know what I mean to say about I like to leave them amped, right? And then they have to go talk to somebody. What was he going to say? I don't know. Why do you want to know? I don't know. I'm just curious. Now, is this clear to you?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I should have been. I should have known. Yes.
Would you want to make a...
I want. Yes.
To use different submodalities for the increase and diminish as you go through?
Yes. Good idea. It's always a good idea to use different ones. But see, you're always going to be going, well, you're going to be going from one to the other, comparing the difference. But the way in which you compare them is you say, now, I want you to look at the size of the frustration. Now, look at the size of the impatient. Now, what I want you to do is to try decreasing the frustration. Right? Now, increase the impatience. Is there a difference? So I do that stuff just literally, and people go, "Yeah, there is," because a lot these submodality things are not as fixed as we make them out to be. It's like when you ask, "Is there a difference in size?" It's like when you go through. If you notice when you do elicitation, brightness isn't really the big deal. There may be a difference in brightness, but it's not one of those controlling elements. Like location would be a controlling element, whereas things about size and closeness very often are the one thing they could change. They can make their frustration more or less by changing it this way. But if it's here, it's frustration, whether it's close or not, as long as it's here. So what you're looking for is going back and forth, but literally telling them to make them different. And and you go, now decrease this one, increase this one. Okay, do you notice the difference? Yeah, they're different. Okay, now you can intermix in there. Like I wouldn't recommend it here. Just here, let's power through it. But when I'm doing it with people, what I do is I go through and I elicit the distinct ones. Like I'll go through now. I'll go, now is location different? When I know it is, they're going like this. I'll go, it's a different. They'll go, yeah. But it just makes it more covert. They think you're just doing submodality elicitation. They don't realize that when you get down here, that every time they think about guilt, it's going to slam them into curiosity, which is going to get them into behavior, which for me is the big thing. I mean, people that feel guilty are the ones that haven't done anything about it. So I want them to be damn curious. I want them to be so curious they're foaming at the well, you guys go ahead and do this. Okay, how about you? Are you done? Why don't you come up and get this one and then go back and finish that one? So, otherwise, you'll have to feel guilty about taking up too much of the group's time. Yeah. That was my favorite thing that people used to say in groups in the old days. They used to go, well, I feel guilty about taking up too much of the group's time. And then everybody go around and lie to them and tell them how that wasn't true. Well, it was so great because when I started doing seminars and teaching and people started asking long questions, I could turn around and look at them and go, don't you feel like you're taking up too much of the group's time? And they'd be struck with guilt like a thunderbolt. It was like, zzz. All they had to do is find one of those people with a little encounter group training, boy. But I always loved it, because when I was in college, they forced us to go to encounter groups. Part of it, they made us go, and some of us just were not into that shit. And they'd always do this stuff where they'd have somebody say, you know, they'd have people go around, and they'd always tell you, they go around the room and say, well, do you think I'm taking up too much of the group time? People, oh, no, you know, no. They come around to me, they go, do you think I'm taking up too much of the group time? I think you're way too much of the group's time. And I think you're a sniveling little asshole, you know, that ought to just shape up. If you'd have just done whatever this is, instead of having to ask everybody first, it'd have been over and we could have got on with it. Everybody in the room would go, God damn it. You know, it's like that, you know, these people, they cry and moan about all this stuff from their childhood. It's like, you know, I look at them and I go, do you know how old you are? People go, yeah. And I go, how old are you? And they go, I'm 35. And I go, what are you crying about? Something that happened when you were 5 years old. What the fuck is the matter with you? Grow up. You know, they're going back and then you gave my brother a toy and you didn't give me a toy. I go buy your own toy and shut up. You know? I mean, get people to wallow in that stuff until they, you know, they stibble and the snot runs down their face and stuff. Yeah! You know, go take a shower and try again. So, it always struck me as it was more important. I always tried to get them, instead of dwelling upon it, to really have the attitude that it didn't matter. That, you know, I've developed lots of techniques. I used to use, for example, punctuation ambiguity. What I'd do is I'd pace them and agree with it, and I'd go, you know, you believe this is a terrible problem. And everybody in this room looks at you and sees this and knows it really doesn't matter. And it was a beautiful way to chain them out of it, because they get all pumped up, and when I go, it doesn't matter, they go, I go, so don't worry about it. You know, what's done is done. Ain't no thing. I mean, after all, you know, you can cry over spilt milk or you can clean it up. One or the other. What's it going to be? Do you want to cry over this again and again and suffer, or do you just want to go, forget about it? You can always knock the picture out when you do that. They go, huh, I forgot about it. Must be cured. Where do pictures go when they go away, Charles? They go into your timeline, of course. I want to teach you the decision destroyer. Because the thing is that many of us have made decisions in our life that we live by. Decisions about what kind of people we are. Decisions about how to feel about certain things. Decisions about what kind of people we are. You know, I mean, I met people that believe they aren't smart. And up to that point in time, very often they're right. I met people that thought they'd never amount to anything, and I had to agree with them. But that's all based on what they've decided and how they've decided to live. Now, the thing about decisions is when people make these massive generalizations, they reinforce them over time. They are incredibly hard to break through. Now, one of the things you can do is break through them. But the other thing you can do is to go before them. Now, one of the advantages, one of the reasons that we did the thing with the timeline, boy, some of you people in here have weird timelines too, but not as weird as one guy I had. I had one guy who's corkscrewed like this, right, and went right through him like that. And in order to move forward and back in it, he had to turn it, right? But the pictures were like this on it. It was like an amusement ride. I tried it out. It was like, woo! It's like one of these things out of these movies where you get in the thing and it goes like, or what is it, Space Mountain? You guys been on Space Mountain? I mean, for him to go and remember something was like going on Space Mountain, you know. Needless to say, he had trouble with memory. So it's okay. I had him fix one end on something and one on the other, and pulled it straight, and turned it out this way, right? Had him try it that way, and he went, boy, he says, this is easy. He said, but it takes the excitement out of it. And I said, good. I said, anytime you want excitement, just make a picture of a memory and take it and have it donut towards you like this real fast and shake up and down. Right? Make it panoramic while it does that, too. Whoa! Whoa! Haven't you ever tried that? You take a panoramic picture, right? And, you know, don't see yourself in it, but see what you'd see if you're there. Take it, and then have it tilt suddenly this way, suddenly like this, and then go forward. Right? Find out. Right? And put in the background a scream that goes, ah! I won't be able to make a horror movie, will I? I know nothing about this. Little voice in the back that goes, the end! Stamp 666 across the screen. And then suddenly have the bottom burst into flames. panoramic look. Have you ever tried, by the way, this is sort of an interesting thing to do while we're on torturing ourselves here. It's always like to watch the looks on your faces. See, it's interesting, you know. If you get too suntan, you can do this and turn white. It's kind of like putting powder on your face, but a little bit more intense. Is to take, have you ever been to a 360-degree theater? Like at Disneyland, they have the one where you're flying in the plane, right? You ever done that? So instead of having a panoramic thing like this, have one that when you turn keeps going like this all the way around, so it's 360 degrees, right? It's really great. Like, see, if you imagine that you're hanging off the bottom of a plane, right? So when the plane turns, the whole thing goes like that. See, if you make your pictures more like that and then give yourself like a 40-foot screen, say, things can get a little more intense. See, I decided that there's enough juice in people's lives. Right, you know, that most of the people, like if they went to a big panoramic theater, they'd have a little picture like this over in the corner for this, a little picture like that. That ain't got no juice to it. Now, one of the times where that's not the case, though, and this is the one thing, actually, there's one thing you do before this. There's a step that goes before identify decision. And this is a little piece of elicitation. Do you know what the term imprint means? Imprint experience? Okay, what I want you to do is to go through and find some experience, and it doesn't matter which one it is, any experience that was so overwhelmingly intense it changed your life. And it doesn't matter what age it's from, but one that it was just so overwhelming and so dramatic it changed your life. Right? Now, I want you to go through and get the submodalities of that because you're going to need it later. They're typically dramatically different than everything else. You know, they're bigger, the colors are more intense, you know, everything. Like those memories even look more solid to most people. But whatever it is, it's, you'll know which ones they are. If you have trouble finding one, just simply, you know, to have a person pick one of the strongest feelings that they have repetitively in certain contexts and anchor it. Tell them to close their eyes, go float up over their timeline and go back through time, right? And when you see a dramatic change on their face, say, now let a picture come up. When it comes up, typically it'll be one of those. But you can do it however you want. Just get the submodalities of it. Yeah?
Talking negative
I'm not talking negative imprint. I'm talking positive imprint. Are you a psychologist or something? Or? No, I mean, psychologists will always go to one of those. I mean, you know, they've been trained, you know. You go remember something and they think they got to think of something bad, you know. I mean, you know, otherwise they don't get their turn to work. See, they train them in groups. You have to have something bad going on in order to get time. So every week on the way there, their unconscious programs them to have some shit come up in their life, right? So when you tell them, you go and walk into a group full of people that have been like in Gestalt trainings or stuff like that, and you go think of something, and they'll think of something horrible, because that's what they were trained to do. It's like a methodical training thing that people go through in those things. I mean, if you go think of something from your childhood, and somebody go, well, there was this lovely time, man, where I was at this picnic, man, and I was having this great time, man. We played baseball. Everybody in the room will be waiting for, and then what went wrong? And you go, nothing, man. It just got better and better. And they go, and then what happened, you know? How were you let down? You have to have been let down. You go, no, I wasn't. It was just one of the greatest experiences I had. They go, so you feel bad about not having those? I mean, they'll hunt and peck, man. There's got to be some, you're deceiving yourself. It couldn't be real. Think back. You can ruin it. You know? No, I'm not into that. You just want to imprint. You need the imprint for the technique. It doesn't matter what it was. Now, the thing is then, the next thing is to identify a decision that you live by. A decision, and it has to do, it's stronger than a belief in a lot of ways, because it really goes through time. A decision about this is the way the world is, this is the kind of person I am, this is the way I have to be. Now, you find one of those that rains on your parade. Now, what you do is you then take, and you, step number 2, what you do is you float up over your timeline. So you're going to need to know where the person's timeline is, because you can always tell them, float up over their timeline, and to float back from before they made the decision. They don't need to go back to it, okay? This is not one of those relive early childhood trauma things. This is to float back before it occurred. Then what you do is you step inside whatever year that is, whatever age, and tell them to create, using the same submodalities as the imprint, an experience where they make a decision which is more the kind they want. All right? Once they've made that imprint experience, you leave it there on their timeline and have them come up through time, that is on the inside, not above their timeline, but literally inside it, up through their life, through all kinds of things in their life, and to reevaluate all of those things in lieu of the new decision. And what happens is, as they come up through their timeline, it destroys the old decision, since it occurred before it. It works really good in sales, by the way. Do any of you involved in selling things? Well, let me tell you where this comes from, because this is a sales technique I've used for years. When people come in and they tell me, well, they say, well, I've really decided to buy a different kind of car, right? I go, well, now, what were you doing just before you made this decision? I.e., I have them before the decision. When they stop, I then go, now, if you just stop right there, and it's amazing in sales you can do this, but they don't know what you're talking about. You go, what were you doing just before you made the decision? You go, well, I was sitting on the couch and I was, watching the Raiders game on TV. And you go, now, go back and put yourself on the couch for a minute. And what I want you to do is to really think about it this way, and I'll make another presentation and tell them to act as if they had decided that this was the right car. And then it just kind of come up through time for a minute and decide if this is really the right thing to do. And they'll go, well, now that you think about it, I wasn't really that sure about it after all. And what it does is it simply destroys the decision. By going back, holding constant, not having decided, and coming up, it knocks that out of the way. You can do this over the phone. That's one of the things I like about it, because I love selling things over the phone. It's a lot of fun. And it's amazing. When you do sell things, people will do whatever you ask them to. People are so weird when they're buying, especially a high-ticket item, that, I don't care how firm their decision is, you can go through and destroy it. I just taught a friend of mine that sells yachts for a living, and somebody had decided on a particular yacht, and it wasn't the one that he was selling, it was the one somebody else was selling. And so he said, well, if there isn't anything you can do, and once somebody makes up their mind, and I looked at him and I said, make up your mind? Let's remake it. He did this, and he sold a $280,000 yacht the next day. So this does have fringe benefits. He sent me a Xerox of the check instead of a check, though. I was not pleased about that. So I had to go and have him reevaluate that decision. Now, does this make sense? Make sense? You're such an easy group. You can follow instructions. So go do it. Well, what do you think of the decision destroyer?
Very good.
Nice?
It's hot.
It's hot. Now, well, as long as we're on that track, what else can we destroy? Now, the thing about using it, do you have any questions about it? Any strange things happen to you? Did you notice that as a technique, like when I explained it to you, I noticed most of you kind of went, that just sort of went off and did it, that it was a little more intense than you thought it was going to be? Now, I'll tell you, one of the reasons that that's true is that when you start dealing with imprint experiences themselves as a way of using them to build in something you want, that the thing that makes imprint experiences, the submodalities of them, very, very powerful in terms of the way that they change how you act, is that the very nature of them, typically something happens, and it usually has to do with an event. For example, there was one person that I worked with who had a real phobia of swimming. That their approach to swimming was when they got near water, they'd freeze up like this and sink. And typically that's not the best way to do it. Rocks do it that way and get by, but people will not survive. Now, the thing is that they actually did not have a traumatic experience with water. Now, this is one of the things that a lot of times people don't understand. Phobias are where you get a response and it generalizes to something. Now, the thing is that what they saw was somebody else have a traumatic experience. What they saw was somebody get washed over a waterfall. Now, to them, in their mind, it was a big waterfall. But, that what they didn't understand is that was something that everybody did in this place. They went to some place, and it wasn't. But they were looking from the backside of the waterfall. They just saw the water splashing up. And the person went over, was screaming like they were drowning and stuff. But they were just playing. And it's, the kind of thing that people did in this particular place. But when they saw it, it so petrified them when they saw the person splashing and kicking going over the waterfall that they became terrified of water. That what happened when they tried to drag this person in to learn to swim, they went to this camp to learn to swim too, and never did learn to swim. that the actual shift in terms of intensity, that whenever somebody has like dramatic accidents, lots of things, there can be a whole variety of things that create that when you get into that impact, what it is it's for you a cue that if you can find out what those are. What you just did is you went in, you not only identified things about your timeline and learned how you can use one decision to annihilate another one, but the very information you got about an imprint experience now offers you the foundation to actually go through, instead of destroy decisions, to actually build ones. Now, the thing is that the nice thing about these kinds of imprint experiences is they really affect your behavior. They either stop you from doing something or they make you compulsively do things. That there are some people that are overly compulsively careful or overly compulsively frightened all the time. That a lot of these things where you find that it goes on, people who are nervous constantly, right, are always checking on things, that a lot of these kinds of compulsive things that are generated from imprint experiences. Now, and the next thing that I want you to do is I want you to go back and I want you to find an imprint experience, preferably a pleasant one you can, but if it's not pleasant, it doesn't even make a difference. What you really want is that set of submodalities, the combination that serves as the foundation for a learning. What I want you to do is I want you to rummage through your mind. Actually, would you write this up there, Charles, for me? Since everybody has told me they can't read my handwriting for years, and I'm too lazy to write out whole words. Step number 1, identify submodalities of an imprint experience that affects the way you behave and act in the world. Because the kind of techniques we're interested in here are ones that compel you to do things. You see, the piece of work that I did with Mark is all well and interesting. But if he had never gotten up off of the chair and gone and talked to anybody, I may have stopped him from being afraid of talking to women, but it didn't make him ferocious. See, the next thing now is to get him into the state of being a puma, so that he goes out and stalks life. That, instead of going, well, I could be happy and meet women and have a marvelous time, or I could have a TV dinner. I don't know. Half a dozen to one or the other. See, I'm a little more interested in people in life that look at it and go, "Arr," that they really want to go, I'd snarl, but my nose is too clogged up. I don't know how people can get into lust up here, but it makes their nose this way. Hey, baby, how'd you like to have a go out there and have a good time? It's always tough to be cool when you have a ready nose. Oh, yeah, so you think you're pop? Step outside. Now, the thing is that now I want you to stop and think of if your life had been different, because it will be. If you really could go back and make an imprint experience and ram it up through your timeline the same way so it goes right out through into the future. Of a different set of behaviors, a new set of behaviors and characteristics about you, what would it be? In other words, there are characteristics that don't feel like you could ever make them fit with you. Things about the way you would act, the way you would be, the way you would behave. This is a chance to now, instead of destroying a decision that limits you, to create one that expands you. Because what you're going to do, we're a little behind there, aren't we? Identify wanted behaviors. Don't be going into trance deeply. Just follow instructions. Step number 3 is, I thought you were going to write it down and then I'd know what it is. Is what I want you to do is to go back and in the form of the submodalities, create an experience which will lead you to believe that you can be like that and are intrinsically that way. Even if it doesn't manifest itself for years, that makes you know that you're like that. So, for example, if one of you is nice enough to volunteer to assist Mark a little bit, Mark could go back, get the submodalities of an imprint experience, and inside of it put something that gave him a little bit of the attitude of the puma. So that, you know, the pumas won't kill when they're not hungry. But when there's game there, they'll watch and think about it and decide if they're hungry or not. Because when they look at a bird, they look at it and they say to themselves, "You're mine." And they know. Now, if they're not hungry, they'll walk by, but they'll always let the bird know they're letting it live. There's something in the look in its eye that says, "I could have you if I wanted to, but I don't right now." That, of course, you wouldn't be interested in that. Now, is there another Mark in the room? Yes, there is, in a matter of speaking. Now, it's just a way of talking about things. Now, the next thing to do is, once you put it in those submodalities, right, then I want you to have the person float back in their timeline and insert it in an appropriate age. Now, that will depend upon what kind of thing it's about. Say, you're not going to make somebody into being a seducer at age 4. Okay, we're going to stick this in a more appropriate time. So that whatever it is, you have to place it in an appropriate time, and then again, just like you did last time, slam it up through the years, and have it this time go out into the future, so that they can see what kinds of things they are in fact going to do. So as they come up through their timeline, then you shoot out the end of the present and have them make up fantasies of what they're going to do in the future. Things they know will happen. So to speak, let your imagination run away with your behavior.
Is that float back over the timeline or
Over. Yeah, you want to float back over and just insert it in the right place. Wicked little minds we have. It's the giggling corner. This will change. Instead of removing limitations, this is to expand horizons. Trust me. Okay? Thank you, Charles. Now, go for it. And be grandiose. Well, 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 well. How did you do?
Great.
Rich.
Rich?
Rich.
Enriching. Enriching. Oh, I thought you meant you went straight for it. Turn up the money values. Now, do you have any questions about what we did? Well, if there are no further questions, then I'll meet you back here at 10 o'clock. How does that sound? You look a little dazed.
I have a question.
Yeah, okay. What?
When you pick, what we were noticing is like, it's almost like you have all these experiences and you highlight one. Is that imprinting experience?
Yeah, very often. A lot of.
It's not that different from many other experiences, except you did something.
Yeah. Well, very often it is. A lot of times they have to do with something that happened from the outside that's more dramatic, too. A lot of times there was something that was outside of someone's control that changed the way they look at things. For example, one of the people I know, that something happened to them that, like, they thought nothing bad could ever happen to them in life. And they got a very serious illness. I mean, the person was an athlete, and they got an illness that disabled them. And what happened is that when they found out they had something that was disabling, instead of, they thought they had a little tightness in one of their joints, and went in and found out they had a crippling disease, that what happened is the experience of the doctor telling them that was an imprint where they totally changed how lightweight that they took everything, got them to treat their health totally differently. They never thought anything could go bad. And it motivated them to do everything such that they didn't end up being crippled by the disease. It became a full-force motivator. And the ones that are full-force motivators that really get you to act in your own best interest are the ones that are the best for this kind of work. So when you look for those, look for the ones that are propulsion systems that get people out into the world, acting and doing things in their own best interest. If there are any other questions?
How do you have people find them?
Well, the thing is I do things, I find things by a listing program. I just kind of list things like, is there anything like this, like this, like this? As you go through, then what happens is one will trigger something off in them. And they'll go, zzz. Either that, or if they really have trouble doing it consciously, what I'll do is I'll just take the feeling, something they're compelled to do and to do well, anchor it, and then tell them to close their eyes and go back through time and watch for a heavy physical change, and then tell them to let it come up into an image, and typically there'll be one. Okay, see you at 10 tomorrow. Okay, well this morning I want to continue a little bit with what we were doing yesterday. It's another piece. By the way, did you guys like that stuff we did at the end yesterday? I know some of us put it to personal applications. You can get him to tell you what he did. He did homework with it last night, which struck me as a practical application. Of course, you wouldn't want to use this in your personal lives. This is only for your clients. You can't think of ways, one after the other, where this might become useful. Now, there's another thing about behavioral propulsion systems. See, for me, one of the things that I like about what we were doing is that it's a way of getting people to manifest things into behavior. Now, the thing is that one of the things that happens with people is that they don't do things that they could do. A lot of them, like, see, for example, one of the things is that people make a distinction between what is them and what is not them. You know, it's like, you know, they can think about doing something and they go, well, I'm just not like that. And you see, this is what I refer to as the fudge factor. It works in science as well. But in people's personal lives, that a lot of times, see, for example, at the trainer's training, one of the things is that I asked them to engage in behaviors that were extremely different from their own. Now, one of the things that I wanted them to be able to do in terms of platform skills, because even some of the people that were there don't even train in NLP. They were there to learn to be able to be a trainer, and I wanted them to be able to do something that is extremely important to me. When I go to a lecture or something, I don't want to be bored to tears. And I don't want to have to watch somebody else suffer. See, one of the things that I can't stand is to watch a speaker who is all frazzled because they're in front of an audience. They made a little motivational cartoon. You know what motivational speakers are? Those are the ones that go to sales meetings and they take 15, 20 minutes at the beginning and they get people all cranked up. That's what Tony Robbins is very good at, by the way. His whole library is on motivational speaking. He's only got 2 NLP books, as far as I can tell. Neither one of them looks like it's been read. Of course, I haven't read any of them either, so I'm one to talk. But they made out of that one of those. You ever seen those little Muppet cartoons on TV? The Muppets. Okay, you know the one Fonzie Bear. Well, they made one where Fonzie Bear goes up and he starts trying to give this talk, and he's in so much stress. I swear you can see beads of sweat coming off the puppet. And he goes through it, and he starts going, and then pretty soon he starts getting going, and he goes, and he gets all pumped up and cranked up and crazy. And it was amazing. I saw it at a meeting of people that sell real estate. There was 3,000 of them there. They had this thing on a big screen, and this puppet got to these people better than any motivational speaker I'd ever seen. Now, the thing is in terms of being able to get up, when a lot of these people there, when they thought about, because, see, I like to do this thing when I do trainers training, I like to provide the trainers with the worst possible experience they'll ever have and get it over with. Now, since they knew what I had done last year, I decided this year I had to come up with something a little bit unique. So I decided that each of them would have to co-teach with me. Now, they weren't ready for that. And I did it as a surprise test. You know, because the thing is when you're doing training, you don't always get a chance to be prepared for everything that will happen. And, you know, it's kind of, what do they call those, pop quizzes? Well, I did their test as a pop quiz, in which I announced that this is what they were going to do, and I gave them the subject of what we were going to talk about as they walked up onto the stage. Now, this reduced it, plus I told them that what we're going to do is alternate sentences, too, just to make it easy on them.
the look on their faces of complete terror, but they had been prepared for everything. We'd gone through all the patterns they needed to know about. And, you know, we spent time on timing and all kinds of things so that, you know, they shouldn't have any problem other than what they did in their own mind. Now, of course, in their own minds, they began to think of things like, well, you know, so-and-so could do this, because there were some people were just casual about it. It's like, it's what he wants me to do, I'll go do it. And then there were some people that just went, well, I shouldn't do it. I mean, others should do it, but I shouldn't do it. And I asked them, I said, why not? And they would always say to me, well, you know, I'm just not the kind of person, it's like, you know, I work alone, you know. They're not the kind of person that can do that sort of thing on the spot. Now, to me, one of the things that's important is that if you're going to deal in this business, especially in the business of NLP, it's the one where you don't plan. You can plan till you're blue in the face, but when you go there to do it, it doesn't work out, hopefully, because you're interacting with what's going on. I'm always amazed. I used to teach a lot with Chris Hall, and Chris would spend weeks ahead of time planning every moment of what would go on in the seminar. Notes, I mean, briefcases full of notes. Her hotel room was wallpapered with them. And then when she'd go in, none of it applied. You know, because if that isn't what was going on, that's not what you do. Now, for our purposes here, the thing is that when something occurs, as much as what we talked about yesterday is the thing where, you know, you rise up like a four-toed dragon and look out at an audience and say, you're mine. That's what I wanted my trainers to be able to do. I wanted them to look at the audience and realize that they could wield it as an audience. See, when you've got 100 people in front of you, if you just speak to them and they lose them, they start talking and stuff, I mean, it's very hard, but if you actually control their emotional state in relationship to chaining. See, to me, when I want an audience, when I really want to work an audience, I think of inducing in them similar responses and getting the chain to run in a cycle so that I can keep them all going at the same pace. Even if I have people that are slower or faster, that I want to be able to take the audience and have their emotional state rise together and go down together. But my point here is not about audiences. What it's about is about being able to do something both overtly and covertly at the same time. Now, what it is that when people look at something to do, if they look at it, if you take something that you already know you can do, and you just look at it and go, that's a piece of cake, of course I can do that. I can just do that and I can do it right now and real fast. That's real different than when you look at something and you don't know that you can do it. That a lot of times when it creates in people hesitation, and it creates in them a wanton internal state where their internal dialogue begins to run rampant, you know. Instead of that state where you just go, pow. And it's not a thing where you're just going for it, it's a thing where you're doing it. Now, the thing is that when you take somebody like the gentleman that was sitting up here with me yesterday, I forgot his name, Mark? Yeah. Mark, that's right. Okay, take somebody like Mark. See, you can reduce their fear of, I mean, you know, and I mean, I want to tell you, when the first time I had him stop and think about just walking up to some woman he didn't know, he had beads of sweat on him. And, you know, I mean, I knew women were scary, but I didn't know they were that scary. You know, I wouldn't be going to Salt Lake City after, you know, if it hadn't changed for him, I was going to stay out of that town. You know, you go up and walk up to a woman and go hi, and she turns around and goes, hi, how are you? You know, kind of brings up interesting images in your mind, you know. What is, you know, because I'd never been to Salt Lake City, I didn't know for sure. But now, for him to make it so that it's casual doesn't necessarily mean that it makes it so that, I mean, when you reduce the fear in something, it doesn't mean that you're going to step in it and get it done. Now, there's an interesting trick to all of this, which is that if you go through and you think of it as not as a wantonly explicit, but as just a very casual piece of strategy elicitation, then when somebody thinks about, you know, when somebody asks you to do something, and you think to yourself, oh yeah, piece of cake, and just go and do it, as a task, okay, there's a strategy for that goes behind it. There's a mechanism by which you think about it, you know you can do it, and you just go do it. Get it done. Now, that particular phenomenon is another nice one because it has to do with a behavioral propulsion system where you go, piece of cake, sure. Here, you want those? Somebody says, can you do this? And you go, yeah, sure, here. Now, that casualness of behavioral activity is something that would be nice to have in a lot of domains. Now, the thing that I want you to do is to elicit this strategy. Okay. Step number one. You guys elicit the way you want, and I'll elicit the way I want. Okay. The next thing that I want you to do is I want you to have the person think of something that for them, they want to be able to just go do it, not fuck around. Now, I had a guy in the last workshop I did that when he went to work, every single thing he made into a chore. And there are just some things in life that we make them into a chore when they don't need to be. Just go do it. Get it done. When you think about it, piece of cake, go do it. Now, if you think of things that are not that way for you, you know, you have to motivate yourself. See, motivation strategies are nice, but you have to motivate yourself. It makes it into work. And I mean, the thing is, it's like, you know, somebody was telling me that since they had gone to a workshop and learned about their motivation strategy, you know, they could get themselves to, and then they filled in the blank. But it was the get themselves to that I didn't like. It was instead of just going beep and doing it, they were going cranking themselves up. Now, the thing that I found out about this, which is interesting, is that once you identify those particular kinds of changes, what happens is it's not enough to take this and put it through this strategy. The other thing you have to change is the time chunking. That typically what will happen is that as you go through and you get the strategy and kind of how the submodalities work in a general sense, which is usually enough to do a switch, that when you identify things where that aren't fitting into that category now, what happens is that there's a way in which people keep them separate. Because how do you know which strategy to use for what? Well, it's more than just a meta program that makes it work. It has to do with actually the time frame about how people think about the task. See, for example, the guy I was telling you about the other day, who, when he thought about filing, right, so he had to think about filing, right, then he had to think about, you know, making cold calls. He had to think about this. And in between all those things, he would think, I would rather be going for a walk. I'd rather be reading a book. That when he was at work, he didn't just go from one task to the other like boom, 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 boom and get it done. When he was at work, he wasn't working. He was really working. He was working at not working. Now, the thing is that when we elicited the strategy for him about what was something he could do and he knew he could do it, it was just piece of cake, bam, go do it. Then the guy that was working with him then tried to put into the same submodalities working. Now, but what the person who was working with him did is they put in filing as an activity. Right? In other words, they took something that this guy could do, and it wasn't even necessarily something small. For him, it was like going out and playing. You know, somebody said, "You want to play golf Saturday?" There was no problem. He went, "Oh yeah." It wasn't a question about whether he could do it, whether he would win, you know, da-da-da-da. He didn't break it down into all of these pieces. He just saw himself going and doing it and did it. Now, in particular, his strategy had to do with, he would see himself doing it from a distance. It was actually he had a picture that was tilted at an angle like this, and he'd look up like that and see it, and then when it was time to actually go do it, the picture itself was a moving picture, and he would step into the motion picture. He said it was almost like he had to run up behind it and hop. Now, when he attempted to do that with filing, it didn't work, because when he attempted to do it with filing, he saw it from a different angle. That actually the angle that he saw it from, and I know a lot of people, when they do this inside and outside, do not pay attention to the angle. I hope based on the stuff with the direction of auditory. You remember the stuff yesterday that we did, where people found out that the direction of the auditory internal is very critical. With timelines, it's the direction that pictures come from when they come. That right now, the kinds of stuff that we're doing has to do with some real precision about that. Now, if you identify those parts, then the only other thing you need to do is to chunk bigger with whatever the task is. You see, this guy, when he thought about approaching women, he didn't think about going out for an evening and approaching women. He had thought about the act of approaching a woman as a whole evening activity. Do you understand what I'm talking about here? I mean, it's like he could go out for the evening. Since he never got there, for him to approach a woman, his time chunking had to do with it making it a whole evening. He had to spend the whole night working up the courage. Even if he never got there, it was a whole evening activity. Now, when I worked with him, in his mind, I kept making him go out in his mind and do it once, do it again, like, you know, all in the same night. And I remember when I don't even know if this is on the tape, but I remember I was talking to him during the workshop where I said, in your mind, I said, you gotta like, you know, go out and do it 100 times in an evening in your own mind. I don't remember if that's on the tape or not, but I told him in the workshop that he had to do that, because if the time chunk frame that you have for a strategy of propulsion makes the propulsion system accomplish a task over a whole evening, then he's going to sit there all night before he goes and does anything. See, what pleased me about his report is that he went and got 3 women's phone number, right? And that he said he had gone out to, he had lunch with a couple of them, and he'd gone out with one, and he hadn't gone out with the others yet. I.e., presupposition, he will. He's getting cocky about it now. I make them wait. So many women, so little time. That's not much of a change for a month or two, huh? Now, the thing that we want here is for you to pay particular attention to how when you consider a task and somebody goes, piece of cake, right? When there's a point where they go from going, yeah, I can do that, it'd be easy, to the point where they feel like they're going to do it. Now, the transition about their doing it, you're looking, there's a thing that goes, yeah, I can do that, no problem. And then you go do it. And they go, whoop. Now, they're going to have to make a slight transition there. That transition is important. Now, I want you then to identify something that's not like that, something that they make into mental work. For example, with a particular individual in here, it might be the activity of strategy, elicitation, for example. Not to point anyone out in particular. Then the next thing to do is to understand that a lot of what makes it so that a task fits into this strategy, we'll call it the piece of cake strategy, is that you actually take time and change the size of it. Now, this is just going to require a little creativity on your part, because usually what it is that whatever the task is, they've broken it, the way in which they're trying to run it through the strategy, they're trying to run 2 small pieces through it. Rather than thinking of it as a whole piece, they usually have the thing broken down. For example, when I talked to Mark initially, Mark told me that used phrases about working up the courage. See, he had the task. The task was working up the courage, which to begin with is the wrong task. Just to start with, the task is walking across the room, right? But even to him, it was like there was walk across the room, then having to open your mouth, then having to have words come out of it, right? And then knowing what to say, which is not really the best sequence if you stop and think about it. You know, and then all the way off into this far and distant land of asking her for a phone number. But I mean, that was so far off, he didn't even know the intermediate steps. Now, unless he didn't like her, and then it was simple. Humans are strange creatures. Ooh, I don't like her, man. Let's go over and meet her. She looks like a real bitch. My kind of girl, you know? Boy, she could use and abuse you and be cruel and everything. Oh, look at the snot dripping down her face. Ooh, that turns me off. I better get her phone number. We should go out some night. Interesting strategy, if you think about it. Something I know many of you could probably relate to. It's either that or, you know, I know a lot of guys that look around the room to find the person that will reject them. They go, see, it's like they've learned to identify personality types so well that they scan around and they hit one and their whole body goes, no, 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 no. That's the one that's just going to spit in your face. And they go, I love her. There's so many people that are like that. It's like, that's the one that will treat me like trash. It's the one I have to have. You know. I think that it is that people have just identified, they don't realize the difference between the fact they've unconsciously noticed a pattern. They just named the patterns wrong. They go, this is love. No, it isn't. That's abuse. That's a different one. Sometimes people get them mixed up. But it's familiar. It's the one they know. And given that they know it, they're attracted to it. Because there is this thing about people being attracted to the familiar. I remember it was the first thing that Virginia said that really impressed me. Is she said, when I first met her, she was talking about people committing suicide. And I said, Virginia, I said, it's a pretty weird thing to kill yourself, you know. It's like, don't move or I'll shoot myself. You know, I said, what kind of deal is that? And she said, you know, she said that people say that the instinct for survival is the strongest instinct, and it's not. She said, people go for the familiar, you know, and if it's more familiar to be unhappy, they're more apt to stay unhappy than they are to do anything new. And that, you know, if it's familiar to be depressed and to threaten suicide and, you know, to get, you know, all in a tizzy rather than just go out and have a good time because it's unfamiliar, they'll do it to the point where they kill themselves. And I said, well, isn't killing themselves something new? And she goes, not really. They've done it 1,000 times before in their head. And I never really thought about that before. That, you know, if they, you know, that in order to commit suicide, they have to, like, run this movie in their head where they kill themselves, and they even get to see what happens afterwards. You know, that they get to run the pieces, because suicide is really what I consider to be a very permanent solution to a temporary problem. And the thing is that there really isn't I haven't really seen anything that's been done on suicide that really makes out how stupid it is. To run in your mind, to sit around and imagine killing yourself, and then imagine how people will feel afterwards. See, they kind of leave out the fact that you don't get to enjoy that part of it any more than you already have. So there ain't no point in going through with it. Plus, you could be wrong about how that'll show them, you know, because they might go, go throw rice on your grave, you know. So, I mean, if they made pictures like that, they wouldn't be so apt to do it. I know that when I worked with a couple of suicidals, that one of the things that I found is that people take them too damn seriously. It's like the fact that they're threatening suicide scares people. It's like emotional blackmail. And so the suicidals that people get into, it almost gives them this you know, feast of power where they go for a little bit more outlandish suicide attempt each time. They go, we'll do the jumping off the cliff one. And since I live out by the ocean where there's some good cliffs, of course you guys probably have a few good ones around here. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to sit down and I want you to elicit a strategy. The strategy being one where you want to ask somebody, what's a task that if you were to ask them to do it, they know they'd just go, piece of cake, easy, and just go do it. Now, once you go through, you want the sequential part of it and a little bit of the submodalities. In particular, things that have to do with angles. Because you have to understand, this is a strategy where you know you can do something, and then if you were to actually say, well, then go do it, they would. So there has to be a part to it that has to do with it being set up to actually engage. See, there's a thing where if you propose a question to somebody, you go, I want you to identify whether or not this is something that you can do. And it happens every day in your life when people say to you things like, you know, can you reach the glasses up in the cupboard for me? You look up and you go, calculate, right? And then, you know, and they go, you know, can you reach the top cupboard? You look up and you go, I can reach the top cupboard. And then you go, well, get the picture, right? Then you actually are going to step in it and do it. You know, it's like the thing when you walk outside. I've walked outside of places, and I've said to people, I say, do you think you can drive my car? And they'll look at it and go, yeah. Now they're all geared up now for me to say, do it. You know, because, you know, don't think about it, which is a little bit different. The thing is well, it's my way of tricking drunks into my car. Say, I put them in I'll put them in, and I'll have them drive my car, get them behind the wheel, and then push them over. It's sneaky, but it works. Because there are so many people I know that when they get real drunk, they get so stupid about driving. They go, I can drive no matter how drunk I am. You know, yes, but how well is the question. A friend I was with the other night insisted that he could drive home, and he couldn't make it down 2 steps. Fell flat on his face. He doesn't even know how he ended up in a hotel room. But I mean, the thing is I know that he wouldn't have driven anywhere, because before I got up and left before he did, but I also took his car keys with me. You know, it's one of the things that I found is you can borrow somebody's car keys for a minute to go get something out of the trunk, and then they're stuck. I've developed the art form of being sneaky about that. The other thing, see, I'll go to the length of breaking the key in half. I figure they can always get another key. But I know they can't deal with a locksmith and stay awake. So, I want you to go and elicit the strategy. Remember, you want this interesting thing where if they tilt the strategy, it becomes one where they go into behavior. It's got that unique characteristic. Think of fairly simple tasks, but what I want you to do is to compare it with something that they also have the same feeling about, piece of cake, that's longer term. Or, you know, like if you say to somebody, do you know how to ski? Right? And they say, yeah. But it's a precursor to, you know, do you want to drive up and go skiing, you know, this weekend or something? Those kinds of things where people go, you know, when you ask the question, they're geared up. It's like a precursor. Either you're going to ask me to do something, and then you go. When you ask them, they go, and go do it. Use a small one and then a longer one to make sure you have the right strategy. Then identify something where they need to be propelled to act, to get off their ass and move. It's not like go for it, it's like get it done. Get it done now. And it can be enjoyable or not enjoyable, it doesn't matter. It's just something where you need to have action in the world. There's too many people who are waiting for everything. Now the other thing is to understand that in order to make this work, that whatever they need to do, you might need to make the chunk bigger. There are a lot of times that when people aren't getting things done, it's because they're not thinking of the task as the task. So just before you go and switch it into the strategies, I want you to just stop for a minute and think, what is it that really needs to get done? So what they do is so you even get to play a little content in this. How about that? But what we're dealing with here is called the form of content. That for him, the gentleman, it wasn't filing and phone calling. It was working that was the task. As long as he kept working when he was there, he probably would have only had to stay a couple of hours. As it was, he could stay there for 8-10 hours and he never got anything done. It was just like, yeah, I should do that filing. Maybe I'll read a chapter of this book. Should make a phone call. Well, this chapter won't take that long. Yeah, I got 2 other phone calls I need to make. But this chapter won't take that long. Now, that particular mechanism kept him busy, did not keep him working. By taking it so that instead of, he started out where he made this little movie, which is the way he did. He made a little movie of something that was a piece of cake to do. When he made a little movie of filing, his attitude was, well, he said, you know, I know it's easy and it's quick, and it's not hard, it's a piece of cake, but I could be reading this book. It's different than when I had him take the same strategy, but instead put the whole day in it. And when he looked at the whole day as a piece of cake, then it was different. Then he slipped right in. And the other thing he needed was to angle the picture right. So pay particular attention to visual angle, auditory angle when you go through this. There will be some critical mechanism that when you shift it just slightly in terms of a submodality, it switches from being something that you think is easy to something that you're doing. Okay? Go ahead and go for it. And now, can you find some application? Do you guys actually take all these different patterns I give you and go use them? Sometimes I wonder, how could you? There seems like there's so many.
Some get to wait.
Right.
Some get to wait, huh?
Till after the 4-day.
What?
Till after the 4-day cruise.
Well, that's what I meant. I meant afterwards is what I was thinking about. I mean, sometimes I wonder, you know, whether people just go and forget all of this. You know, they go, oh, fuck it, man, you know, that's too many. I'll just keep this one, you know. Because I don't know, it's like, especially sometimes when I do workshops where I get the same people that come back, and I'll know I've taught them this before, and I'll be explaining to them, and they'll be going, wow. Especially after the amnesia pattern for some reason.
In the submodalities, when you work with kinesthetics,
Yes.
which is, we were working together, and I was getting mostly the difference in states. What was significant was kinesthetic difference.
Yes.
The pictures weren't different. I had no idea how to work with the kinesthetic.
Well, kinesthetics has submodalities too.
Yeah.
In terms of manipulating the submodalities, primarily one of the things you use is think about it in terms of sequence and location. Now, if you break the submodalities down, the kinesthetic system moves sequentially. It's really an analog system. Say, the visual system has the property of simultaneity. You display things, whereas the kinesthetic system has a tendency where it moves along sequentially. It's just the same as the auditory system does. The auditory system is also a sequential system. So you're going to want to know the order in which things happen. For example, if it has to do with feelings, it'll be the order of the location of the feelings. And when you start dealing with things like temperature, the temperature may increase and get warmer and warmer and warmer, and then cool off. That you may feel in terms of things like, you know, heat will lead to moisture, which will lead to feeling pressure. And wherever it is that you're going to want a simultaneous representation as a starting point, and then a sequential development. And the way in which you alter the sequential development is you go back to the beginning and you go along and you find a point where you can veer off to go to one of the others. You also can use anchoring, of course. That always helps.
I don't quite understand to go along.
Well, in other words, if you have, let's say there's 5 steps in a process. Let's just use location. Okay, so first they feel something in their knees. They feel queasiness in their knees. Then they feel a tightness in their stomach, right? And then they feel tightness in their jaw, and then a warmth on their head. And that's their idea of happiness. And well, the thing is that if they want to veer off to some other state, there's some other state that you want to get to that has to do with feeling things in the elbow. I mean, literally what you do is you run along the first couple of steps, and then you fire the anchor off and lead them off. If you think of it as a sequential strategy where you're putting a new V in it, so that as it loops, if they're going to a place where you don't want them to go, you want to take the first 2 steps and then have them lead to a 3rd step that goes into a different state. Especially you can find ones where there's kind of an overlap.
So you overlap into another sense.
Into another, not another sense, into another set of kinesthetics. I mean, you literally can alter kinesthetics just the same way you can alter pictures. Especially, you know, because I mean, if you think of it like you can, if somebody starts out like they feel warmth in their hands, okay, and then it starts to spread up their arms and then spreads all over their chest, and you can have them feel warmth in their hands, and when it spreads up, then you can have it start to cool off until it starts to get cold, so that you literally make some kind of a transition to something else. Now, if you have 2 sets of submodalities and they're just discretely different, then the thing is that you can literally have them take the ones that they have and have them increase, right, until they go through some threshold and then go into the other one if you want to alter them. Or you can just anchor the other set of kinesthetics. That always works well, too. Is there any other questions?
Is swish with kinesthetics the same?
No, it's a sequential system. So you don't switch. See, swishing
It seems to simultaneously, so you can't do it.
well, it has to do with taking simultaneous representations and switching them.
You can't do it with K's.
Well, you can do it. That's what anchoring is. I mean, in essence, that's what taking one anchor is. But what you do is you have to think about it in terms of chaining. Kinesthetics work in chains. That's the way they work. Anyway, I wanted to throw that piece in before we sort of closed the particular segment we were doing yesterday.